right, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you happen to find yourself. My name is Carmen Yetzi-Mazzara. I serve as Executive Director of APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. It's wonderful to see many names that I've gotten to know over the last couple of days, but welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time this week for our Public and International Service Advisor trainings. For those of you who may not know, PISA is a network of advisors across the US who work to support each other and hopefully make it a little bit easier to champion these issues on your campus. And so we're so glad to have you here for this session and all of the sessions this week as we start to lay the foundation for helping you do that. And in particular, I hope you'll join us on Friday for our session that talks a little bit more about APSIA and PISA and all of the things that we'll be able to help you do going forward. We're particularly grateful to the Robertson Foundation for Government that invests in this training workshop and enables us to do these kinds of things. And we hope in particular that you've had a chance to see the program that talks all about the different kinds of things we're doing this week and also talks about our wonderful speakers that we have here today and throughout the sessions. If you haven't had a chance to see it, I'm going to ask my colleague Brianna to please put the link in the chat so you'll be able to pull that down later and get a sense of all of the different amazing aspects to the career of our speakers and to the other kinds of programs we're doing. And with that, I'm very pleased to hand the floor over to Sharon Swabb. This session is being recorded, so if you miss something, you'll be able to pick it up later, and you'll find it on our YouTube page pretty soon. And with that, Sharon, please.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Carmen. And it's so great to be here with you guys. I'm honored to moderate today's session. For this session, we're going to be focusing on essentially helping to equip you to help your students with a favorite topic of mine, is branding. So we were talking before we let all of you guys into the chat or into this particular room. We were talking about how for a lot of us, when we're working with students, a lot of them are under the misnomer that their experience, say if it's unpaid, say if it's working in retail, say if it's working off campus or even on campus, that it doesn't necessarily count towards what they're trying to achieve in their career. And we're really focused today in this panel discussion on challenging that thought and better equipping you guys to be able to help your students to challenge that thought and to reframe it in their mind so they can better understand how their experiences, be what they may, can really help them in terms of transferable skills, in terms of the things that they have learned on the job or an internship or an unpaid capacity, how that can help them to reach their professional goals. So we have three amazing panelists who are joining us today. I'm just going to do a really quick introduction of each of them. Their full bios should be in the packet and information that you've received. But the first one is Shereen Ali, who is a program manager at the Institute of International Education. The second is Nicole Campbell, who I personally know, hi Nicole, who's the director of graduate admissions at George Washington University in our Elliott School of International Affairs. And then the third is Mike Youngson, who is a policy officer and career development officer at the Defense Intelligence Agency. So I hope that you will join me in welcoming these folks today. We're going to be essentially kicking off with some initial questions that I will pose to the group, and then we will open it up to general Q&A. Please feel free to, if you have a question and it's burning and you really want to make sure you don't forget it, please feel free to throw it into the chat. If not, we can wait until the Q&A session and you can come off mute if you would like. Now, as Carmen mentioned, this session is being recorded. I do invite everyone to turn on their cameras and to mute their mics for this session. But if for any reason you have concerns about that, you are welcome to turn off your camera if you do have concerns about it being recorded. Now, let's kick things off. And hopefully I can throw you guys a couple softballs to kick things off. But essentially, when you were working with students and your different capacities, what are some ways that, or I would say, what are some things that students have written in grad school admissions essays, in resumes, and cover letters that really have resonated with you in terms of how they told their story? What were some things that they did that you found were effective in conveying their story and their potential? And it's open floor for our panelists, whoever would like to take that one first.
I'm happy to start us off. So hi everyone, my name is Shereen. As I was just introduced, I work at IIE and I particularly work on the Boren Awards program. And I'm an advisor on the Boren Awards program. So from my perspective, I would say that some of the things that we've seen in successful applicants is when applicants talk about life experiences that they've had. So we've seen a range from whether that's study abroad, internship experiences, or and even just kind of other life experiences, right? They don't have to be internships, say on the Hill. They could be experiences that they've had working in retail, as was mentioned before. We've seen folks talk about their the experiences that they've gained, say, in the service industry. And what's important is that there are skills that that they have gained from those real life experiences, but then how they tie that into future career plans that they have for the federal, in the federal government. There's definitely a lot of intangible and tangible skills that are transferable, and those applicants are successful are the ones that can show a connection of how this intangible or tangible skill gained would transfer in, a role that they would like to see themselves in the federal government. So that's kind of a basic answer to start us off.
I'll echo some of the things that Shereen said. I think that, being able to tell your story is really important. From my perspective, looking at it from a graduate admissions perspective, we really want to see that story conveyed in a statement of purpose. And so you have this finite number of words to convey to us, your story. And from my perspective, what I'm looking for is a journey. I think a lot of applicants, when they're looking at grad school, they're identifying one specific incident that happened in their life that kind of triggered the pathway to the field of international affairs, or it could be a pathway to another field of study. And what we want to see is how did that incident kind of like trigger you to take action? Like, what did you do? Not just one time 20 years ago, an incident happened and now I want to apply to this field. Like, what have you done since then? And that could be volunteer work, that could be work in the field, that could be, developing some skills or taking some courses that were really connected to that field. And so being able to tell your story that's specific and individualized to you on that pathway to where you want to go. And also, as Shereen said, how those things are going to apply to what you want to do in the future. Not that just you're interested in this field, but you want to go somewhere. You have an ideal job or title or organization that you want to work with, and like, what are the things that you've done to work towards that? Just off the top of my head, just to start.
So when I'm in the application reviewing kind of process, typically college students and so on, and we talk about the work experiences that they're doing and their entry-level positions. So these aren't individuals who are going to have 10, 20 years experience. It's most likely they're going to be at school. They might have a summer job. They might be doing something in school, those kinds of things. And they need, we ask them to kind of tell a story. Context, action, and results. Put it in context. I don't need, don't give me a whole big long sentences about the project, just tell me the project. Don't name drop. I know that you might have been working with somebody who's important. That's awesome. But the results, what were your individual actions? And then we ask individuals to kind of look at all the things that they've done over the past few years. It's not a bulleted job description, but it's more of all the different things that you've done. And then RTFQ, find out what they're asking for. If you're going to do one career field focused on project management, well, project management, they look at things differently than, say, somebody in analysis. And so talk to your audience in a way. So
All really great advice. I'm so happy, Mike, that you mentioned context, action, result. I feel like I say that every single day in meetings with students. So I'm so happy you mentioned that. And I really appreciate also the focus on the journey and the focus on connecting those transferable skills. Talk to me a little bit about these less tangible traits. You know, a lot of students, they can communicate that they have research skills or communication skills or things like that. But what about things like resilience or leadership or emotional intelligence, which we know are valued in the workplace? But for these advisors, what would you recommend to them in terms of coaching students to highlight those intangible but really important skills?
I think if you can give an example, the most amazing interview I have done was with a grad school student who talked about an incident when she was a counselor at a girls' summer camp. And she explained the situation and kind of put you in there and the things that she did and the teamwork and the counseling and those kinds of things, but in a way that, okay, she has these skill sets. We're going to train the daylights out of somebody when they come in, but if somebody has demonstrated abilities to do certain things, then we only have to hold their hands for a little while, train them up, and then they can be off and running. But if they don't demonstrate some things that might relate, then it's going to be they'll be in the 90% that we don't invite for an interview.
So from my perspective, I will say that some of the things that, you know, really stand out are when students are able to talk about how did they adjust in an unfamiliar setting. You know, I think that to be able to show resilience and cross-cultural communication is really important. Especially for, a future in service. So being able to, I guess, being able to talk about, what was it like, being in an unfamiliar, a living situation, or an academic situation. Oftentimes, or in a professional setting. And, it doesn't, like I said earlier, it doesn't have to be in like an academic internship or anything like that. It could be in a variety of settings. Oftentimes students also have experience living in environments that are different from what they're used to. So whether that's, other students that they've lived with that come from all different walks of life. I think that can speak to their experience for cross-cultural communication, and also resilience. Like, how did that experience pan out? So talking about that can also help convey resilience, I think.
To kind of touch on what you were saying about resiliency and how students have kind of overcome some different things. One of the things that we do in our application process is we encourage students to include like an addendum if they've had maybe like a bad semester on their transcript, right? Like, you're starting your freshman year, you're new to college, you're not quite sure what's going on, but sometimes that can affect your overall GPA if you start out wrong, like if you start out like with a couple low grades or something like that. And one of the things that we really do in our admissions committees is look at kind of that journey. Like, were students able to maybe struggle in those first couple semesters, but then bounce back? Either they did the right things, they met with their advisor. So even that kind of like communicating that you were able to take steps to talk about some of the challenges that you had and then how you overcame them to succeed later in the program. So to be able to communicate that in your essay or as an addendum to your transcript is a way that we can see resilience, to be able to see like, okay, these things happen. And this is something that doesn't like count against you in the application process. In fact, it can work to your advantage if you're able to convey that you were able to like overcome those initial challenges and then be successful later on.
Would your advice differ for our advisors here? if they're working with really young students, say like a freshman in college, versus if they're trying to advise a senior or a graduate student. We're assuming seniors and graduate students have more coursework under their belt, more experiences, as opposed to someone who's fresh from high school. For our advisors who may have these different types of populations, what would your advice be? Or would you advise the same thing?
I think that's a good question. I mean, I think later in the process, you've gotten some of that under your belt. You've gotten some of that academic experience. And so what you're trying to convey at that point is, you know, where are your particular interests and why? And so hopefully you've already, you know, you've either been able to demonstrate some of this either by working in a student organization or working in an internship. You're going to have more opportunities to build examples of this than maybe in your freshman year. And so I think early on, it's talking about making sure that students who are just starting off are using the resources that are available to them, making sure they're meeting with career counselors and advisors and faculty to talk through any challenges that they're coming across early on. But later in the process, it's confirming that if you haven't done that already, that you do that, but then also thinking about kind of what your experience have been and being able to represent that in a cumulative way. I don't know if that answered the question, but that's my thought. It is different. You have more experiences as you go through the program and as you have these experiences. And, you know, hopefully they've had a chance to interact with advisors as they get into their like junior and senior year already. And if they haven't, never a bad time than the present to do that.
So something I want to add to that is that I think that approaching their narrative with the short-term, mid-term, long-term goal is important. So if if it's a student who's a freshman in college, or fresh out of high school, I think if they start with kind of based on the information that they're armed with now, what is their short-term goal, right? And then their medium-term goal, and then their long-term goal. So I think that also helps us see that, with the information and with the experiences they've had so far, they've got some kind of system or stepping stone. And it's also completely understandable that things will change as you gain more knowledge, as you gain more experiences. This might change. So if you're advising, students that are fresh into college, it's definitely fine to lean on those experiences that they've had in high school. Something that we say, to new college students, I would say, is that, there may be you have these interests. There may not be an internship or a job experience that you have to lean on or to talk about, but there may be a course that you took or a class that you had that could speak to your goals or to your interests. So that's definitely something also okay to mention. And then for like a medium-term goal, you have this interest. Hey, I want to do an internship in, say, for example, international development. So that could be that's definitely something that's a good way to kind of help shape that narrative as well.
I would say I probably talk to more juniors, seniors, and grad students, occasional freshmen. We do have our internship program where it takes a year to go through our clearance process. But as was mentioned, sometimes there are significant things in high school, and don't feel bad about reaching back and mentioning something significant and maybe tailoring what you're putting in to addressing the areas that they're looking at. Because you can get somebody who might try to fluff up a bunch of things that really aren't answering what they're looking for. It certainly can be a challenge, but we do have some younger folks who come in, apply as a freshman if they have enough credit hours. But
Thank you. Now, you guys have been mentioning, experience, coursework. A lot of students often feel that they don't know how to market their degree beyond the fact that I majored in this job relates to this particular major. So what would you say to these advisors, especially for students who are leaning more heavily on the courses they've taken than necessarily the work experience that they have? How would you advise our advisors to, boost students' confidence or work with students to show the value of the courses and the research projects that they've done in class for their professional goals?
I would say yes, the courseware, obviously, the other experiences. If a work experience is a school project, then tell me more. Tell me, what was your role? Did you have to pick a team? Did you have to provide updates periodically? What was your, what were your deliverables? What was the format? Some other things like that. What did you do as part of it? Why was it a success? We're big on impact. What was it that you did that caused that to be successful? Or what were some things that were kind of building blocks that you realized you took this class, you didn't know anything about it, and it was valuable and it's kind of influenced some of the other classes that you've taken, or you took something you thought it'd be great and you're having to completely change direction.
Yeah, I think Mike had a great suggestion there. And I think that one of the things that you want to highlight is, like, if you're doing research in a course, like, what are you researching? And are you researching that as a team? Like, teamwork is a very valuable skill, both in graduate school and in the workforce. You're going to be working on teams pretty much the rest of your life in a lot of scenarios. And so if you're working on group projects, are you able to highlight that? And then thinking about, like, what are the skills that you're learning? You're learning both academics, but sometimes you're also learning practical skills in your classroom. And so what are the skills that you're learning? And it's okay to list those. You've learned them. And yes, you might not be able to apply them yet, or you're working on that. But I think to be able to say, like, I've learned it, I've done the work, I've done the research, I've written the papers, to be able to identify what those are, and especially as they align to your career path, right? If you're applying to a particular job that's looking for these particular skills, if you've learned those skills, to make sure that you're highlighting those.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Nicole just said, but students should definitely maybe think about talking about, are they, learning a new way of communication? Are they learning a new language? I think that particularly for language learning, if that's something that a student is doing, definitely, speaks to, just kind of, navigating a new culture, and also draws back on the whole, the whole resiliency factor as well. It definitely also lends to the cross-cultural communication piece. So I think that's definitely something that if they're interested in, or they've had any experience in high school or as a freshman, or any time throughout college, that's also important to talk about.
Thank you. There's a couple more questions on my end, then I'm going to open it up to the group. For your particular organizations, what are some of the skills that you are really looking for from students? So our advisors know if they're trying to help their students get into grad school or get an internship, what should they really be encouraging or helping their students to communicate in terms of what makes them a competitive candidate for your particular organizations?
Well, I'll echo the teamwork component. Graduate programs are going to require, teamwork in their courses. And so to be able to identify that, I think, is really important. Now, for an international affairs school, not every program, but a lot of programs are going to encourage foreign language knowledge. And so if students have that foreign language, it can be really valuable, not always required for every program, but can be an asset for sure, as well as economics. But other things like career or conflict management, those are some things that you can be learning in the classroom and working on, you know, global citizenship. If students have done study abroad, certainly not everyone can do that, but if you have the access to participate in that or do some kind of volunteer work, those things can also be really important as we're looking at a profile of an applicant, at least for our school.
I'll chime in from the Bourne Awards perspective. We're definitely looking for personality growth, and then definitely resilience and cross-cultural communication. Since the focus is on, second language acquisition and learning about a new culture, and the ultimate end goal with the Bourne Awards is, federal service. We're definitely looking for, key traits that, that show us resiliency in the student. And also, like I said earlier, personality growth. It's important to be flexible, and what kind of experiences have you had and how did you fare, during and kind of at the beginning, through and at the end of that experience. So I think that definitely goes a long way.
So I was talking to some students who were, well, I'm in this major, which means I can only do this type of thing. The Defense Intelligence Agency has 10 career fields, numerous specialties. We obviously need folks who are able to do some international work, but then we need engineers, we need facilities types, we need architects, we need a variety. And when I talk to folks, I kind of tell them, look at every single career field, look and see what your skills and talents might be, because project management is applicable in some of those skills. Economics, I was talking to a student who's majoring in economics, and well, our analysis career field really can use people with that kind of skill set. Engineers, well, running facilities, not just being a science and technology. So don't discount. I think when I looked at one school's colleges and different majors, I think I was able to match most of them up, and maybe some other interests. So don't think that, well, I'm only going to be in this one potential area. And maybe if you're looking at some places to land, they don't have a good fit. Well, then there's plenty of other organizations and agencies that might be a better fit.
Now, I want to ask a question because Nicole brought this up in terms of not everyone can study abroad. So for students who may not have access or funding to be able to study abroad or to do an unpaid internship, for our advisors who are working with those students, what advice would you give them to help them coach these students to still gain the same skills and experiences, for lack of a better word, so that they can still compete, even though they can't finance or they can't have the same amount of access to these same types of opportunities?
I think Shereen kind of touched on kind of just the value of cross-cultural communication. So even if you can't study abroad, being able to engage and interact with people from different cultures has value, regardless of whether you're overseas or here in your hometown. So consider opportunities to volunteer, or if you're working, I mean, a lot of people, regardless of where you're working, you're still interacting with a variety of different people from a variety of different backgrounds. And so be mindful of what are the skills you're developing, even if you're working a part-time job, either on campus or off campus. Are you learning conflict resolution based on, if depending on where you're working, sometimes you will interact with conflict, right? And so are you developing those skills? Are you interacting with people from different culture? Are you able to show empathy to people from a variety of backgrounds? Are you interacting or participating? Are you demonstrating leadership skills? Are you maybe a manager with the organization you work with? Are you participating in a student organization where you have a particular role? All of those things can be considered experience when it comes to that. And regardless if it's study abroad or just interacting with different cultures in different ways, all of that can be really relevant.
I think mentioning some of the other cultures, across many campuses, you've got hundreds of organizations. There might be a whatever kind of group. One of my buddies was from Thailand when I was in college, and I got to learn a little bit of Thai. But some of the cultures, and they would have clubs and appreciation stuff. Our daughter was supposed to go to Shanghai last summer, and well, we found somebody who was from China, and they went shopping at a supermarket and talked about this and that, and so on. And so while she couldn't be in Shanghai, she learned Chinese. Chinese is not an easy language, but she learned more about the culture and the people and perspectives. And there might be in your hometown a group of people from different parts of the world who are trying to blend into the U.S. culture. And you know, it's like when you live overseas and you try to practice your German or your whatever, and well, everybody wants to practice their English on you, but I wouldn't discount some opportunities in your own backyard.
I think that just to add to that, I think that especially moving forward, advising, considering that we've all lived and are living through this global pandemic, right? And it proposed challenges on its own. So, you know, students might have experiences that, you know, even through a global pandemic, they had to work, especially for those blue collar jobs. Definitely, how did you overcome those challenges, right? That, you know, I think that's really important. Or if you were working and it was in a virtual environment, I think something that we've learned over the last year is, you know, there's a kind of a higher sense of accountability. Some of us feel working in a virtual environment. But how did you, if the nature of your job, working in a virtual environment, proposed any challenges, how did you overcome those? So I definitely agree. You don't have to have those, you know, Hill internship experiences or that study abroad experience to really talk about cross-cultural communication or resiliency. I think cross-cultural communication, sometimes students we get bogged down in, oh, you know, just communication with folks from different cultures or folks from different parts of the world. I think that, you know, on a daily basis, even in my job, we're really communicating with everyone that has a different style, and how we show flexibility, I think that's really important. So I keep saying flexibility, but flexibility, it's something that we've learned over the last year. I think flexibility is really important.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'm going to open it up now to our attendees. Any questions that you may have? I see that we have one already in the chat, but please feel free to either raise your hand on Zoom, and I will do my best to catch all of those raised hands, or to put your question in the chat. So we have one from Nora Montoya, who is talking about working with students from underrepresented groups who have a hard time reaching out for help. So as advisors, what would you guys recommend to our advisors in terms of what they can do to really encourage students to come in to ensure that there's greater access, equity, and education about these key topics?
I think that's a really important question, and something that I imagine all of the advisors struggle with as well. I mean, we even think about that from an admissions advising perspective, like how do you get to the students? And part of it, I think, is meeting them where they are, considering partnering with student organizations where the students might be participating, or residential life. You know, if they're living on campus, then there might be a programming through the residence halls that you could potentially participate in, where you're coming to the students instead of hoping that they come to you, because you're right. I mean, I'll admit I'm a first generation student myself, and didn't even realize that that was a thing I should be doing when I started as a freshman in college, to meet with an advisor. And part of me felt that it made me feel like less competent to be a college student if I had to seek out help. And that's something I still struggle with now, even as an admissions director, is making sure that I'm going to the students to let them know, like, this is not a bad, like, asking for help is a good thing in a university setting. And so figuring out ways to partner with, I think, student organizations and other departments on campus where there are interactions with students, I think can be really valuable. I know at GW, they started kind of like a first year experience course for freshmen. And I think that there are opportunities there as well to come to the students to say, like, we're here, this is what we do. We're actually, like, you want to be friends with us, you want to come know us. But it is really hard. And I definitely sympathize with you advisors trying to get them to come to you, because I can completely understand.
I'll say that for from my Bourne Awards perspective, we try to partner with, departments and professors in basically in different areas of the school and departments. I know Nicole mentioned this as well. If there's a languages department or any of the STEM fields, I think that sometimes those professors have a kind of a closer relationship with a lot of the student population. So that's definitely proved to be helpful for us. We definitely struggle. We definitely struggle with diversity in our applicants to an extent, but we've seen that get a lot better over the last so many years. And diversity is a huge, really does matter. And especially because the students that are applying and that are hopefully being awarded are also tomorrow's leadership, or the people that we hope to see in government in the future. So diversity definitely is important. But I think that partnering, I agree with partnering with a lot of the different student organizations on campus. That's really helpful. Something that we've also utilized is former alumni of the program. And I think that if they're able to talk to the student population, or able to spread awareness about the opportunities that are out there, that can definitely go a long way. And oftentimes we hear stories, right? Like, oh, I connected with so-and-so and they told me about their experience, and so I decided to apply. And those may be far and few, but they definitely go a long way. So different organizations, different school, different departments, and also just if you have alumni, if you're fortunate to have alumni at your university of the programs or organizations, I think that also helps.
I agree as far as the going out and the engagement part. To simply say, well, we post a job opening on USA Jobs, or say a school's hiring website, and I'll post things there and I don't get a lot of feedback, but yet when I reach out to the career services advisors or professors that I've been introduced to through other students who are trying to find some places for their students to consider, or those kinds, or other groups, and word of mouth. We had an amazing intern come in, went back, talked all about how she had the most incredible summer, and well, her best friend was the best interview I've had yet, and some other people like that. So it's sending an email, posting it on a site is a start. Then you can refer to that, but it's going to be that engagement aspect where I have found to be a bit more success.
Thank you. We have a question from Ryan Wagner, who was talking about, low GPA was mentioned earlier. So I think this question primarily goes to Nicole, but what would you tell students who are aspiring to graduate school but have GPAs that are lower than the advertised minimum? How can they make that up in their personal statement and recommendations? And I would also open it up to Mike and to Shereen in terms of a student who might be applying for the Bourne, who might be applying for an internship, who has a low GPA. How can they make up for that in their application?
So yeah, it would be wrong for me to be like, it's no big deal. GPA is not a big deal, but GPA is a deal. I mean, it really is. And, a lot of programs are looking at GPA as one of the biggest factors in making decisions. as I mentioned, starting off with a lower GPA and building up over time to show improvement can certainly be a factor. But if you've maintained a pretty low GPA over time, you want to think of ways to counteract that. One of the things that I would recommend is work experience. Some students want to come right out of undergraduate into a graduate program. If you have a lower GPA, you might want to counteract that with professional work experience where you've worked in the field, and it might be something entry level, but just having that exposure to professional experience can sometimes create a little bit of a balance to your applicant portfolio. Certainly statement of purpose can have some impact, and so can recommendations can have a little. But I wouldn't promise that the two will always balance out a really low GPA, but it can, depending on the kind of letters you're getting. Letters of recommendation, I think it was maybe Mike who mentioned that, like, just because you worked with a big name like senator or something like that, getting that letter of recommendation doesn't necessarily mean that they know what your performance was in the internship. You really want people who can speak to your work ethic, to your working ability. Maybe you weren't the best student in every class, but there were a couple faculty members who thought you were the best student in their class. And so those are the recommendations you want to get, so that you're having people who are really talking outside of just a cookie cutter letter of recommendation. They're talking to your work ethic, they're talking to like your commitment, and they're talking to some of the obstacles that you overcame. So that can definitely be a way. The other thing that I might suggest is, this isn't the best thing to do for every student when it comes to accessibility, but you might want to consider taking a couple graduate courses non-degree. So like you've completed your graduate or your undergrad program, maybe you're working or maybe you're taking a break. You might want to kind of just put your toe in the water of grad programs, like take a couple classes, one maybe at a time, just to see how you can do. Because one, academic standing is a little bit different at the graduate level. For example, at GW, in the undergraduate, you can be in good academic standing with a 2.0 GPA, but at the graduate level, you have to have 3.0. And so if you're really teetering on that line, you want to make sure that you can do that good standing academic coursework and get that minimum GPA to stay in good standing. And so testing a class might be a way to do that. The last thing I'll recommend, I don't want to take up too much time, but is talk to the faculty that you're interested in their research at the university. Sometimes it's about face recognition and name recognition. And so if you're interested in a particular field and the faculty that are really, your interests align with, connecting with faculty can be a really nice way to put names with faces, to express your interest in the program. And sometimes that can help balance as well when it comes to admissions committees and decision making.
For DIA, we have a 3.0 minimum for our internship programs, but otherwise, in the application process, you can include your GPA, where you went to school, your major, things like that. I read through that. It's another part of it. Sometimes it's interesting what they're majoring in, but I would much rather have a fulsome work experience write-up than somebody whose GPA is a whole lot higher than another individual applying because they're like, well, I'm focusing on my studies. And okay, awesome, that's great. Tell me more about you. Book smart, street smart. So I'd rather learn more about an individual and all the things that they've done. And so if somebody's doing great academically, then perhaps they will be able to tell us more, and their work experience might bring along. But if I got a choice between one or the other, I'm going to pick more work experience than a better GPA.
The most important thing that I'll say is address it. Don't try to cover it up. I think that most reviewers, and from a board perspective, most panelists will understand that, will be understanding about it if they know kind of like even a brief backstory. Of course, share what you're comfortable sharing, but it's important to address it. Boren doesn't have a minimum GPA requirement because we look at the application as a total package. We want to see the range of courses that you've taken, the range of, life and work and internship experience. And if you've been fortunate to have previous study abroad experience, that as well. So that's why we don't have a minimum GPA requirement, because the traits that we're looking for, as I mentioned earlier, kind of the resilience, the growth, the or the cross-cultural communication, that all comes, it's a collective experience. So I would say definitely address it, and that's important. And then, if you're in the process of being, or trying to overcome that, talk about that. And if you're kind of at the tail end of, say your academic career, you're applying and you are where you're at, still talk about those future plans, and again, just address it.
For our attendees, please feel free to drop a couple extra questions in the chat. One piece that I wanted to touch on was, Shereen mentioned earlier, virtual opportunities. And with the past year, there have been a lot of those. So I want to ask the panel, how do you view those opportunities? If a student has gone to school virtually, if a student has had to take credit or no credit on their transcript, if a student has had to do a virtual internship or a virtual study abroad program or things like that, do you view that as equal to in-person opportunities, or do you view that differently? And I know this is probably something that is still probably in the works given how recent this pandemic situation has been, but how would you view that for students, and how would you recommend that our advisors coach their students to advertise that experience on their applications?
So I can start us off with that. I think that you're right. Some of it, this being in this virtual environment is fairly recent, but I think that over the last couple of years even, we've come a long way. So I know that there used to be kind of, preference to in-person experience versus virtual, but clearly we know that tide is turning, right? I think that having virtual experience can speak to, how well are you, how good are you at taking direction, or even taking initiative. I think that students will also have had virtual experiences, whether that's courses or internships or jobs. Talk about what did you like in those courses or in those internships, and what would you like to, what about that did you like, and would you'd like to do in person one day, right? I think that is definitely something that students can also talk about. Like I said earlier, a virtual setting could also pose certain challenges. Okay, what was that challenge? What did you do to navigate that? I think that being in a virtual environment is just another environment that you're navigating. So you don't have to physically be in a different environment. I think all of us have made those adjustments over the course of the last year and a half. So talk about the switch in that environment. Everyone, this may seem kind of, this may seem small to a lot of students, but I don't think that, I think that it's also important to talk about when you had to make that switch from in-person to virtual. It's, some students may not have had the ideal situation in terms of where they're living or who they're living with, and to be able to focus or on that course, or to be able to give that job 100%, but they did, or they tried their best. So so definitely addressing that is important.
I think Shereen's point was good. Here's the situation, you took advantage of it. And one nice thing about the virtual environment, the majority of my agency went to telework status, and we're in part of the intelligence community, but not everything we do has to be done on computers at work. We interact with DoD on policy review. It's all unclassified. And so I've got 3 of my coworkers who are going to continue doing teleworking, and they are working long hours and very productive. And so people who know how to navigate that, that's awesome, because we're going to have some experiences where we're going to need people to do things in different and unique ways. And if you can demonstrate your ability, but show that you were able to take a challenge and you made the most of it. And, you know, because there will be another challenge, the unforeseen challenges down the road. And if you can show, hey, nobody was expecting it, guess what? I was able to do some good things and made lemonade out of lemons. So if you can show that, because there are many people who are in my agency who aren't doing so great at it, and somebody else who can, it's like, well, look at this person.
Yeah, I mean, talk about resilience, right? I mean, everyone has had to be resilient over this last year. And I think, you know, especially thinking about students kind of like mid-March last year, having to pivot dramatically from maybe being in person to having to position themselves online and still develop, you know, classroom experience and relationships with faculty. I think you're right, that to be able to say that you kind of were able to like interact in this mode and be successful, I think is really you know, talking about strength. And especially as we think kind of about kind of like how more and more interconnected our world is getting, you know, organizations are constantly already working in these modes. You know, they're working with agencies overseas or organizations or partners, or if you're consulting, you might have a client in a totally different country and you have to manage your time, you have to manage technology, all of these things that are going to be really important skills in your career, in your education, all of these things you're learning right now. Maybe you wouldn't have had that opportunity if we hadn't been in this space. And so I think we, you know, I mean, I can't speak for every other institution, but I'll say from a graduate level, at least at the Elliott School, we think that this is a sign of strength that you were able to be successful and kind of overcome the challenges of this last year and do these things in a virtual setting. They're only going to make you stronger as you kind of pivot into graduate study or your career.
I just want to add 2 last points to what Nicole said. So, you know, I would say also talk about the content of what that job or internship or course was, because I think that can also, depending on what the content of it is, you know, some kind of, you know, some a little bit more complicated to navigate than others. So I think that can also help communicate, you know, what that experience was like. And also, even though you were in a virtual environment, what are some steps that you took to say, you know, build that relationship with your supervisor or professor? And I know Nicole mentioned that as well. We all know that that's hard. But, you know, was there an additional opportunity that you decided to take on, or a piece of, you know, or some piece that made you stand out? So it definitely requires you to seek those opportunities out. So talking about them would definitely help kind of tell that full story.
Continuing the pandemic theme and seeing no additional questions in the chat, there's a lot of uncertainty with the time that's coming up, you know, for the summer, for the fall. As students continue potentially in this virtual environment, what would your recommendations be to advisors to help these students, you know, gain these transferable skills or gain these experiences in a virtual environment? Is there anything that you would encourage these advisors to encourage their students to do, especially if we persist in this virtual platform?
I think the virtual environment has kind of opened up some new doors, some new opportunities. We used to have a big process hiring events. We had people fly in and from all over and big expense, but now we can do it virtually. We interviewed somebody who's a contractor working in Afghanistan. and that was fairly straightforward. There's other things such as this, where you wouldn't, otherwise you'd have to fly into DC and go to some big whatever, but now you can dial in. And we have a list of webinars. I would say there's a bunch of schools where they're going to have, Madeline Albright is speaking on something. Condoleezza Rice was at DIA last week. Some other things, Baldy's speakers. And it's, think about when you just learned about the internet, for those of us who, all this stuff is new, and there are, you don't know what you don't know, but I think if you can advertise to your students, here are some online opportunities, some webinars, some other ways to learn about a few different things that keep people engaged. And, the more you can advertise, the more they can go, oh, it's not just me sitting in a class, but it's me dialing in. And look, there's Madeline Albright, there's, Colin Powell, there's Jack, well, okay, other people, but you get the point.
I think I agree with everything that Mike said. I think that all of those things we want, this situation has opened up so many new opportunities. I mean, we've had a lot of our faculty say that they've been able to bring in so much more kind of like high profile speakers into the classroom because they were able to do it virtually that they might not have had that opportunity to do if we were all in person again. And part of me thinks kind of some advice is to like think about what are those opportunities that you in your shop can maintain in this virtual space as well. Even if we do go back to kind of everyone being in person, like what are some of the tools and tricks that you learn from the virtual setting that are transferable to in person as well? There might be opportunities to record some of the sessions that you're maybe doing live and in person so that students who maybe couldn't meet with you could access a recording. Some things that, I think that students have really valued is the chance to like go back and watch the recording of an event that they maybe were only partially at because they were also like babysitting in the background that you didn't know about, right? And so having access to recording of sessions and things like that, I think some of that will be transferable regardless of what the future brings, to take some of these technological skills that we've developed and be able to keep integrating them into what we do and not go back exactly to how it used to be, but just something new and different.
Yeah, I 100% agree with, with Mike and Nicole, definitely. This last year has definitely presented some new opportunities. We get questions all the time from students that are like, well, if I'm doing this Born program, can I do, X, Y, and Z along with it? Or can I take, can I also take a course at my graduate school because I need it for completing my degree? And oftentimes, oftentimes if they're able to do that, they're able to get a lot more done because of just the flexibility of the environment now. So definitely agree with both of you guys.
Awesome. If you guys would like to join me in thanking our wonderful panelists, Shereen, Nicole, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time today. For the attendees, some housekeeping items. There will be a brief Zoom evaluation poll that it's popping up right now that you will be asked to complete. I ask that you just please take a few moments to complete that poll. And then also Carmen wants to remind everyone that there is a group share at 4 p.m. today on practical ways to bring public and international service to campus. So you are all encouraged to attend that event as well. But once again, to our panelists, thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you for taking this time. There's a couple of fun links that are being thrown into the chat, but I wish all of you a wonderful rest of your day. And yes, a wonderful rest of your week as well. Thank you again.